Hey my friends, let's discuss RS here, and you are in the right place for Runescape lore. This is the lore of Runecrafting. Enjoy.
So we begin this story like so many that have come before, and that is with the almighty Guthix. During his efforts in exploring Gielinor, Guthix ended up shattering the Blade, the Elder artifact created in order to better help shape the other creations of the Elder Gods. But despite the fracture that was beyond repair, Guthix instead took its displaced remnants, and with the aid and power of the Stone of Jas, built the World Gate in all of its glory. After solidifying its stability, Guthix started transporting various colonies of creatures to the world, most notably the goddess Seren, along with the elves, and the dwarves, humans, and gnomes as well. Guthix would then bestow magic upon the mortals who were previously incapable of wielding it, by using the Stone of Jas to create runestones, and with that, Guthix would send out his emissary, Mizalionar, to distribute them far and wide across the land, and thus kickstart the use of runes and magic in Runescape. Early in the First Age, we can see Mizalionar's influence almost immediately in the quest Meeting History. During the quest, when you are in Past A, you can see a boy named Jack playing by a fire pit with a fire rune and an air rune in his hands. When you switch to Past B, you now see Jack as an adult, and we come to find out that he is now a wizard, and not just any wizard, but he is the first wizard of Gielinor, the first to credit a spell, Fire Strike, and probably most importantly, the founder of the Wizard's Tower in Mistalin. If you talk to Jack, he will tell you that he was taught magic by Mizalionar, the first druid of Gielinor. At some point later, Guthix would appoint Harold, Gielinor's first citizen to die, as one of his guardians, and weirdly enough, this new set of tasks, the Grim Reaper, would attract a friendly face, Mizalionar. Death would refer to Mizalionar in life as both a student and a teacher, with a deep sense of curiosity, but the curiosity soon turned into morbid fascination, and Mizalionar began spiraling. We know this to be true, as during the quest Requiem for a Dragon, Death makes this statement about Mizalionar. It reads,
"I had taken up my post as Death some time before we met, but we were both counted among Guthix's chosen, and became acquainted. He had such a fascination with my work. I believed it was nothing more than scholarly curiosity. In his final years, he became increasingly paranoid. He confided in me that he suffered a recurring nightmare, in which he was smothered in black, stone hands. As the nightmares persisted, he began researching a way to counteract the sinister forces he believed were at play. In doing so, he turned his back on Guthix and his teachings. The last time I saw him alive, he talked about creating a new kind of focus, a beacon which could force back shadow and light the path for wayward souls."
Such a fall from grace, as originally, Guthix entrusted Mizalionar the solemn duty of safeguarding the runecrafting altars for future generations, that would enable them to craft new runes. Mizalionar's path would diverge tragically as a result of simmering feelings of betrayal and disillusionment towards his divine benefactor. Feeling aggrieved by Guthix's perceived withholding of magical knowledge and the enigmatic truth surrounding Erebus, Mizalionar's faith faltered, paving the way for his descent into darkness. Driven by a sense of betrayal and a thirst for arcane mastery, Mizalionar renounced his sacred duty and embraced the forbidden arts of necromancy. In his later years, Mesolionar would dedicate himself to erecting many sacred sites across Gielinor, relics of great power where he would inscribe upon the foci he created details of the incantations they were to be used in. At some point in the First Age, Mesolionar would be murdered by an unknown assailant. However, at this point in his life, he was no longer burdened by his past, and he somehow, through the use of necromancy, managed to reanimate himself, and now taking the persona Raziel, the first necromancer, as the runecrafting altars he was sworn to protect were no more. After these events, likely during the very end of the First Age, or the beginning of the Second Age, the unlikeliest of men, a stunted and weak seer by the name of V, stumbled upon the Stone of Jazz deep within the underbelly of the Lunar Isle mine, and upon touching it, it suddenly activated, sending shockwaves of powerful energy and endowing him with godlike abilities and the secrets of lost and forgotten knowledge. Although V did not truly ascend, the aura of the stone did cure his withered body, offloading that horrible burden that had handicapped his life. When he went once again to grab the prized discovery, the stone had vanished, but in its absence, the stone's residual effects transformed the resources around it, leaving a volatile substance in its place, runescence. After much deliberation, study, and experimentation, V found that he could change the essence's properties into the elements of the universe itself by focusing his mind on them. V would go on to be the founder of the Moon Clan and would teach his people simple magic, things that would benefit their survival and overcome the harsh environments of the frozen north. V's truly most notable contributions, though, came when he and another large contingent of Fremnik set out into the greater world, where they would seek out the places of enormous energy and power, places that radiated the frenetic spirit of the altars in the pocket dimension, previously tasked to Mesolionar, and built great structures surrounding them, binding and tethering their connections through talismans to be accessible by the everyday man. In the Moon Clan Manual, written by an unknown author, it relates the basics of magic, myths and misconceptions, and gives us some more direct commentary on the events I just relayed. It reads,
The Basics of Magic, a primer in the mystical arts. This primer has been collated from years of our research into the metanatural arts, commonly known as magic. All those wishing to set forth upon the astral path should read this primer until the concepts within are fully understood, so that their potential may be fully realized. Chapter 1. Myths and Misconceptions. Those familiar with the history of our people will know that the source of magic has always been a contentious issue. Our Fremnik forefathers believed magic to be a possession of the gods, and that our use of it risks far more than any benefits it may bring. We, of course, take the more enlightened view that we should use all tools at our disposal for our own betterment. Beyond any ethical or moral issue surrounding magic, however, lies the key question: what exactly is magic? The other obvious question that presents itself then would be, where exactly does it come from? I intend to explain here how both of these questions are actually the same question, phrased differently. The first major misconception relating to magic is that the stones we use for our arts somehow contain magic within them. Although roughly correct, to believe this is how magic works limits your understanding of our own potential and will prevent you ever achieving the feats which we are capable of. Rather, the runestones that we shape to our purposes serve to focus your own power, rather than containing the power themselves. A short history of how the runes were first discovered will serve to illuminate this point to you more fully. As we all know from the tales told to us in the Secret Tongue, magic was first discovered in these lands by V when he accidentally stumbled upon the Stone of Jas. The stone was clearly not of this world, and the mere touch of it unlocked something within the mind of V. As we know, the stone was instantly removed by those powers who walk a higher astral path than ourselves, but its very existence showed V possibilities that have never occurred to our kind before. His lifelong search for the stone never did reveal its eventual fate, and the myths suggested that the stone may yet still lie somewhere within this world. But he did discover something of great importance in the caves where first he found the stone. The very rocks that had surrounded it had been subtly changed by its presence. The rocks in their contact with the Stone of Jas had gained a yearning to be something they were not, and V discovered that by focusing thought upon them, he could transform them entirely for short periods of time into the very elements of the universe. This is a mere parlor trick, as many of our young have done the same thing with essence as children, making the cold burning fire in their hands on summer nights, and he knew that should be able to effect a permanent change upon these stones, he could have access to the very powers of the gods themselves. And so was created the Astral Temple. This was the first, and to this day we honor those who walked before us on the astral path, and prevented falling into the ruin that this dimension has caused to its counterparts. By a regular concentrated effort of will upon a large dolmen of essence, by a number of people simultaneously, the dolmen was finally convinced that it had become something which it was not. The astral rune, symbol of our very way of life, it is a testament to what is possible if we seek understanding.
At some point later, V would eventually ascend to godhood and play a very key role in the God Wars throughout the Third Age. But after Guthix awoke and banished them with the edicts, he allowed V to say goodbye to his people before voluntarily leaving the world of Gielinor behind. And once more, the runecrafting altars now lay in purgatory. Alright, now let's transition to the late Fourth Age, where Radalin, a man of great influence and sway amongst the Dawnblast tribe, used his status as king of these handful of villages to play defense against the more notable and powerful kingdom of Mistlin. During this period, many of the tribes west of the River Lum were pledging allegiance to Mistlin though, seeking safety and sanctuary, as many of these tribes were frequently subjected to beast attacks, among other things. So eventually Radalin would hear reason. King Radalin sought in to join the kingdom of Mistlin under the advice of the White Knights, who acted as the guardians of the Western realms, as the tribes had no wizards of their own to remove their vulnerability to other races. Although a twist was on the horizon. Lord Sanafin Valzin was the daughter of the Duke of Varrock, making her eligible for the Varrockian line of succession and a member of the nobility. Though despite her noble birth in a predominantly Sardamis city, she turned to follow the faith of Zamorak, leading to tension and distrust amongst her and her family. She would ultimately be exiled, and at the dawn of the Fifth Age, she gathered together a group of dark mages and offered them to help Lord Radalin of the Dawnblast tribe establish his new kingdom. As Radalin's kingdom grew and expanded its borders, Valzin persuaded him to allow the creation of a new knightly order, leading to the formation of the Kinshra. As the two orders, now working in tandem, during the years 4 through 8 of the Fifth Age, a series of conflicts would take place known as the War of Unification, as they united under the banner of the future King Radalin and set out to unite all 22 tribes of the Asgarn. The monsters who were threatened by this, who previously roamed the plains, moved together in great force to eliminate mankind and purge all humans from the lands. Hordes of creatures fell upon the human tribes. Many lives were lost in the bloody battles that ensued, but through that alliance between the White Knights and the Kinshra, man stood triumphant and the kingdom of Asgarnia was born. These events can be retold from the documentation of that time. In a book titled The History of the Kinshra, obtained by searching a shelf in the southeastern corner of the 3rd floor in the Black Knight's Fortress. The book's author is Poole Scryant, on commission of Lord Decarius Renard and current Lord of the Kinshra. It reads,
Chapter 1. To understand the order of the Kinshra, one must be familiar with the time in which these events took place. Nowadays, man lives in relative peace, without fear of a violent and sudden death. The Fourth Age, however, was different. Even though the gods had agreed many centuries ago to cease their wars for the sake of the world, the mortal races remained in bitter conflict. Each strove for superiority, for land and resources. With each side gaining no foothold over the other, the fighting seemed endless. It was the Fremennik discovery of rune essence that changed this. The ability to craft rune stones, which had been lost for millennia, gained humans' advantage over the other races. Using their magic, the humans claimed the lands for their own, ushering Gielinor into the Fifth Age. As Botolf proudly declared, it was the age of man. Chapter 2. The borders of the ancient realm of Misthalin expanded, and tribes of men hungry for sanctuary readily pledged themselves to King Botolf from Arnis of Varrock. The tribes of the west, however, remained reluctant to sacrifice their independence. With no wizards of their own, they remained vulnerable to the other races. A small kingdom of a handful of villages had existed here for centuries, ruled at this time by King Radolin of the Dawnblast tribe. It was also home to an order of the White Knights, who acted as the guardians of the West against invading races. However, the protection they offered could not hope to equal that of Misthalin's many orders of mages. The Knights attempted to persuade King Radolin to sacrifice their sovereignty and merge with Misthalin for protection, with the other races being driven out of Misthalin and into the lands of the Western tribes. It appeared they had no choice. Indeed, all territory between the treacherous slopes of White Wolf Mountain and the sunny docks of Port Nina may well have been part of modern Misthalin, were it not for the events that followed. Chapter 3. Curiously enough, it was from Varrock that another option presented itself. Lord Valzin, a wealthy nobleman, saw opportunity in the chaos, the chance to forge a new kingdom for his favored god Zamorak. The orders of Magi at the time contained many dark wizards, also followers of the Lord of Chaos and Death. Although they were men of a very different type from Lord Valzin, he managed to persuade them to help. Thus, it was that a man of Varrock delivered to King Radolin and the White Knights the means of retaining their independence. King Radolin was only one of many tribal leaders, but Lord Valzin convinced him it was possible to unify the others. Radolin would be king not only of the Dawnblast, but also of all the lands west of the Lum, and the men within them. Chapter 4. Supposedly, even then the White Knights held suspicion of Lord Valzin's proposal. Radolin decided to accept the nobleman's offer and began unifying the smaller tribes and settlements, ever guided by Valzin. Soon, the western tribes, with the Dark Wizard's help, moved to expand their domain and overpower the other races. As King Radolin and his kingdom grew in influence, so too did Lord Valzin. 4 years into the new age, the day came that the nobleman persuaded Radolin to allow him to form his own order of the warriors, so that Lord Valzin could better aid the expansion of their kingdom. Valzin argued that faith was a great motivator in creating effective warriors. The White Knights of Saradomin were an excellent example, but devoting another order to Saradomin would be erring on the side of favoritism. Instead, Lord Valzin, along with other men of wealth and power, with whom he had secretly made deals, suggested to Lord Radolin that these warriors should pledge fealty to another god, Zamorak. It was on this day that the Order of the Kintra was founded. Chapter 5. From the onset, the White Knights were mistrustful of the Kintra, whether due to conflicting religious sensibilities or a sense of entitlement over the Zamorakians, who traditionally came from working-class backgrounds. The reasons vary from account to account, but it was clear, irrespective of the exact motivation, it fostered a great rivalry between the two orders, although neither disclosed this fact to King Radolin. Whatever the reason, both orders were distracted by their secret enmities and failed to notice a greater threat that was brewing beyond their borders. The human tribes had not been the only ones to unite under a common banner. Various non-human races joined forces to overcome Misthalin. They saw the orders of knights and considered their forming to be an act of aggression. They moved together in great force to eliminate mankind, to purge the humans from their lands, and hordes of creatures fell upon the human tribes. The White Knights and the Kintra, dubbed Black Knights by some. The Kintra disliked the term as it implied a connection to the White Knights, immediately set aside their differences, and for the only known time in history, formed an alliance in defense of their land. Many lives were lost in the bloody battles that ensued, but through an alliance of the Knights' orders, many tribal warbands, and the aid of the Dark Wizards, men stood triumphant. It was on this day, 4 years after the Kintra's foundation, that Asgarnia was established as a nation. With Radolin as its king, its capital became Falador, one of the Dunbla's humblest villages. Falador began to grow rapidly as both knightly orders made their home there.
Okay guys, so before we continue, I just wanted to mention the distinction in text about Sanafin, also known as Lord Falzin. Certain pages in my research suggest that she is a woman, and this also goes with what I will be laying out here soon in terms of events to come. But on the other hand, in the in-game text, the history of the Kintra that was just read, it does refer to Falzin as male. So my point is that I'm not really sure which is supposed to be canon. So if that makes any difference to you, just a heads up there. So my reason for giving all the context and setup of Asgarnia is due to the events that would take place during King Radolin's reign. If you remember the statement from earlier in the reading on the Kintra, it mentions the rediscovery of rune essence in the Fremnik region, and how the ability to craft runes had been lost for millennia. But no more, as the humans finally had the advantage over the other races. This is a reference to the plotline to the newly released RuneScape novel by Aaron M. Evans, titled The Gift of Guthix. Let's dive. It was the 7th year of the reign of Lord Radolin, the 7th day of the month of September, Fremnik Province. Yony, a young girl of 16, whose father died in a battle and her mother to a fever, was adopted by her aunt Marana, leader of the Narvra tribe, looking to overthrow Lord Radolin. Yony was Marana's secret weapon, a spy amongst the ranks of Lord Radolin, acting as a mere scribe. So here we find ourselves, Yony, along with Osrs and Endel of the Green Order, posing as mages from the Moon Clan and gliding towards the Fremnik docks ahead. The Fremnik clans had once more discovered rune essence and had called counsel to their magical brethren, looking to take care of the problem as the Fremnik beliefs were in opposition to that of magic. As Master Endel engaged in the rites and rituals with the clan leader Jarl Vil-Jar, Yony befriended the Jarl's youngest son, Gunnar, who she convinced to take her to the Rune Essence Mine for a sneak peek ahead of tomorrow's expedition. As they descended into the earth, something blocked their path. An excerpt from the book reads,
Is this Ilme began, but Gunnar hushed her and pointed into the shadows. In the darkness, two great luminous eyes opened, and something massive shifted into motion. She knew she ought to run, or to flee that huge creature, but shock stopped her feet from responding. "Well," a great sonorous voice said, strangely gentle despite the size of the speaker. "You've returned, little mortal. And what have you brought, I hope you don't mean her as an offering. Not at all to my taste." A deep rounded laugh boomed through the cave as the speaker pulled itself forward. Ilme blinked, unable to make herself speak. It was a frog as tall as a longhouse, patterned with pale green and dull purple patches. A droplet like a tear outlined in vibrant blue between its bulging eyes. A guardian, Ilme thought, feeling lightheaded. A guardian of Gothics. They were said to stand over places of great power, great magic, wardens of the sleeping god's gifts. "I could kill it," Gunnar had blustered, and all Ilme could think was, "I wouldn't let you."
After conversing with the guardian Zoria, they end up leaving back for camp and returning the next day with the full party, taking rune essence with them to study back in Falador once their ruse was up. Back on the mainland, Ilme would take to the Druid Circle, just outside the watchful eyes of the knights and the castle, where her cousin from the Narvra was waiting for an intelligence report. Ilme would fork over some information on sit-in discussions with Lord Radolin and Valsden when talking strategic decisions, but otherwise she purposely withheld the excursion to the mines. Ilme asked if she was to come home soon, amidst rumors of someone's mistrust began leaking through Radolin's court, but she was quickly dismissed, instead giving her a magical necklace of protection. Ilme returned to Falador, awaiting what would happen next. The 8th year of the reign of Lord Radolin, the 33rd day of the month of Moving, the Asgarnian frontier. After much deliberation from the Council of Radolin, he proposed a trek through the surrounding lands with the party of Master Endel, his apprentices Osrs and Eratona, Ilme, Lady Valsden, and a few of Valsden's wizards from her ranks in order to unlock the secrets of runecrafting. In another excerpt from the book, Ilme and the rest of the party finally unveil the ruins of the Air Altar. It reads,
If Ilme had not known what the pull of magic on her soul felt like, she would have passed the fallen rune altar by. In a clearing surrounded by towering elms, the tumble of huge stones, their surfaces obscured by shaggy moss and layers of dirt, might have been nothing more than a perch for wolves, a hollow for a badger, a dark nest for creeping insects. But it wasn't. Master Endel broke through the underbrush, striding up to the stones. He pulled away the moss from one facet, revealing a broad, flat surface, split by a ragged crack. Weathered marks of words in an unfamiliar language had been carved deep into the surface. "This is the altar," Master Endel murmured. His hand smoothed the stone surface of the table, running down the edges of the crack. "Something's badly damaged it, but if it's possible..." Yony came to stand beside him, peering at the carvings. Osrs peered over his shoulder. "Do we have the runes to repair it?" "Here," Master Endel said, thrusting the bag of runes he carried into her hands. "Let me read this, and you can make a tally." Ilme's tongue stuck in her mouth. A vortex of magic flowed into the fracture, only instead of feeling like rune essence did, an insistent dragging on her soul, this felt more like the world was narrowing into a passage that she wanted more than anything to race down. The table was broken, yes, the altar damaged, but the power was still here. "It's not broken," she managed, almost panting. Master Endel frowned at her. "What was that?" "We could try sealing the cracks with rune essence," Asris went on, running her hands over the crack in the stone. The markings, Yony began. Air, Ilme whispered, her thoughts overflowing with the answer, like a great wind sweeping everything else away. It makes air. It wants air.
During the process of restoration, they were attacked by a cohort of giant spiders and hungry wolves. As the knightly orders were fending off the advances, the wolf matriarch began charging Ilme. Suddenly, her necklace flashed, saving her from a deadly strike, only to then be transported to the pocket dimension of the altar. They had done it, Asris and her, with the aid of the talisman and the staff, infiltrated the astral plane. Unfortunately, this would only cause further issues, as Asris now noticed Ilme's necklace and put the puzzle pieces together. She was the spy. Asris would take advantage by blackmailing Ilme into doing all of the runecrafting for her, while she took all the credit, in exchange for her silence, of course. They would eventually repair and craft the altars of earth, fire, water, body, and mind, and during that final leg of the journey, before returning to Falador, Vol'zin would pull aside Ilme and play little mind games, planting the seeds of doubt in her allegiance with Guthix, and instilling instead some very convincing ideology of the Zamorak faith. Over the coming months, Asris would demand more and more of Ilme, and due to the nature of her situation, the stress and burden of her treachery became too much to bear. Ilme would confess her crimes as a spy to Lord Radalin, and being the merciful leader, spared her life and used the false battle plans she fed to her aunt to kill her in a surprise attack. With Radolin's biggest adversary out of the way now, Ilme was officially appointed Master Endel's apprentice, and her rightful place as a true mage. The 42nd year of the reign of Lord Radalin, the 6th day of the month of Pentember, year 42 of the 5th Age, Fremnik Province. In this year, the real Moon Clan came to the Wolf Clan's camp to expose the Asgarnians' deception of impersonation in the years prior. Gunnar, now in succession to be the Jarl soon enough, took the news incredibly harshly and led the Moon Clan representative to the mines to confront Zoria the Guardian. In an excerpt from the book, it reads,
"Are you the guardian of Guthix?" Saldis demanded. "I am," Zoria said. "You are Saldis. Welcome to the Runescence Mine, the gift of Guthix." "You are the guardian," Saldis said, "and yet you allowed yourself to be deceived by the Asgarnians. They have overtaken your mine and stolen its gifts. They think Ilme has been lying," Gunnar explained. "They think the miners who come here have nothing to do with the Moon Clan. Could you explain the truth?" Zoria chuckled. "Ah, I see. You're angry they have been play acting. If it eases your pride, I did not think they were from the Moon Clan. Like children in costumes, it has been very amusing, and they were not rude about it." The blood seems to leave Gunnar's head. "What?" he said. Zoria tilted his head so one great eye focused on him. "They are from the south. As she said, they are from Asgarnia." "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" He felt dizzy, as if his soul weren't quite tethered to his body. Why would she lie? They didn't think themselves worthy on their own merits. But that's their own foolishness, Zoria asked. It seemed important to them to pretend, and not at all important to me that they were pretending. It's not as if they were Bandos and his goblins coming in to raid the place. Believe me, I've sent them fleeing a time or two. Hot shame boiled in Gunnar's chest. Ilme had lied, and Zoria had helped her, and he'd been in the middle, stupid and deluded. This must have been part of the plan. Make friends with the Jarl's son Keep him busy, keep him distracted. Feed him enough to help to keep him in line for the leadership, because then you'd have a Jarl you could manipulate. What an idiot he had been. His father was right.
Yony had been spending the past few months traveling with Eratona from court to court as she negotiated the various treaties that let the Asgardian and Miscellanean wizards cross through each other's territories to use the rune altars. The crafting of runes and rune magic had prolonged her and her colleagues' lifespans. When Yony returned to Falador, she had some post waiting in her chambers, and upon opening a sealed letter was just 4 words: "I know you lied," as her stomach dropped. She would immediately leave for Relica to try and remedy the situation to make sure the trade agreement with the Wolf Clan still stood. With reinforcements behind her, including Valzen, just as a precautionary measure, Yony took the path to the mines upon her arrival. There, at the bottom of the cave, she could hear Gunnar and Zoria in a heated exchange. Just as things were escalating, Valzen had snuck behind Yony from a distance, and in that moment of turmoil between Yony, Gunnar, and Zoria, unbeknownst to them, Valzen summoned a demon. This was the result. The book reads:
The creature spread bat-like wings, blocking the exit, and roared, loud enough to shake the cavern. Rigid horns curled from its skull, its red skin rippling with muscles as it hefted a wicked-looking sword. The air burned in Yony's nose and eyes, and she backed away, one hand reaching for her rune pouch, one hand pulling Rue away, pushing him toward the back of the cavern. Demon, Zoria intoned. The creature hissed around terrible fangs and uttered a string of guttural language, heavy with disdain. Zoria returned with a booming so deep it rattled the chains draped over the demon's arms. Then the great frog lunged forward, jaws parted, slamming into the demon, as if he were trying to swallow it whole. The wicked blade came up, slashing Zoria's slick skin, and the Guardian pulled back. Yony clicked air runes together in her hand. Fear and force of will collapsed them together as she thrust her hands forward, and gusts of wind with them. The demon threw Zoria aside, the spell narrowly missing the giant frog as they tumbled, scoring the demon's back and leaving dark lines of ichor running from it. The demon howled. It turned and backhanded Yony, flinging her across the wet cavern floor. Her head bounced against a stone, sending stars across her vision, and she heard the tinkling sound of runestones bouncing over the floor. Rue landed on her chest. Up, up, up. Her skull pounded, pulsing with a rhythm that felt like it was shaking the very earth. She let her head fall to the side and saw the demon's cloven feet stamping closer. Yony rolled out of the way, scrambling to her feet. Her head swam, her runes were all over the floor. She fumbled for the pouch she wore around her neck, trying to conjure a blast of earth this time. The demon lunged for her, claws snatching at the stones near her feet. Zoria slammed into the demon again, driving it from her. It reached up and sank its terrible claws into the Guardian's dappled back. A white foam bubbled up from Zoria's slick skin, and the smell of burning flesh flooded the air. The demon screamed, a sound that threatened to crack Yony's skull as the poison left black and boiling tracks across its skin. Yony searched the cavern for the summoner, but there was only Gunnar, circling the demon and Zoria, looking for an angle to attack. I could kill it. How could you possibly know him? Zamaran had asked. She felt as if the world was slipping underneath her. Get away from him, she shouted, but Gunnar was already moving, blade aimed. Rue flew straight into her stomach, runes clutched in all 4 claws. Here, here! He let them fall, clinking to the ground. Yony swept them up, years of study and practice letting her sort them by touch. earth, water, blood, nature. She collapsed the last willing vines to erupt from the stone to bind the demon. But the creature, burned by Zoria's poison, thrashed and twisted from the grip of the frog's jaws, and the spell missed. Gnarled roots clinging to only Zoria's foreclaw. The demon broke free, launching itself skyward, dripping ichor, one wing torn. It looked as if it was trying to escape. And then it dropped, straight down to Zoria, who sat, bleeding, battered, bound to the floor. In that moment, too many things happened. Ilme closed her fist around the remaining runes, choosing the first spell that came to mind. Fear and rage burned through her, so hot and bright she might have crushed the stones physically in her grip. But the magic unlocked between her fingers, freed by need and will, as she threw a wave of scouring earth toward the falling demon. At the same moment, Gunnar struck, leaping forward, axe high. He would hit the path of the spell. The demon would die, but he would die too. She couldn't call it back. But Zoria pulled himself up, lunging toward the demon, as if to knock Gunnar aside. And then the demon vanished, a rip in the air swallowing it once more. The spell she'd cast swept over Zoria instead, as the great frog sprang up. A horrible cry of pain burst out of him, the sweep of wind and sand tearing his flesh. His cry broke off as Gunnar's axe came down in the Guardian's skull. For a moment, time froze, and Ilme couldn't hold the idea of Zoria being anything but ferociously alive in her head. In the next breath, he would laugh in relief. He would praise her quick spells and Gunnar's caution, and Rue settled on the bulk of the Guardian, on his torn and bloody shoulder. His wings fluttered, agitated as he hopped down the great frog toward the axe, the immutable axe.
Hey my friends, long video, so let's just take a quick breather. If you have been enjoying the content, I'd appreciate a like on the video and share your thoughts in the comment section down below at the end of the story. Thank you. Following the battle with the demon, both sides blamed each other. Gunnar blamed his former friend in Ilme to have summoned the demon that struck Zoria and making him accidentally kill the Guardian, whereas Ilme believed Gunnar to have summoned the demon and killed the Guardian by mistake. This falling out would usher in a new era of Fremnik hostility and an extremely resentful and bitter outlook on life for Gunnar. These times are known to us by a few names: the Great Invasion, or more aptly titled, the Runecrafting Crusades. In the years after, around 42 to 55 of the 5th Age, things drastically changed. Growing weary of his father's old age, Gunnar would kill him and thus expedite his path to becoming Jarl. As new chieftain of the Wolf Clan, he would proclaim to his people that he had seen Guthic's will, believing that his father's death was a sign from the sleeping god that he is meant to lead the Fremnik to a greater victory, to avenge the dead Guardian Zoria and free Gielinor from its future doom. His plan? Destroy the rune altars to keep magic out of the hands of the mortals, as Guthix intended. With this plan in motion, Gunnar started his campaign by conquering other clans or recruiting them to his cause. In the judicial courthouse of Sears Village, during the trial Barbarians vs. Wizards, Olaf the Bard had this to say on the events. It reads,
"The council of the time was led by clever and powerful men. They recognized our strength and looked to increase our holdings by invading others. So, they told our people that the gods were angry at the use of magic and that heretics must be wiped out for their blasphemous practices."
And it continues.
It was a hard time, as the land was barren and there were so many mouths to feed. Many of the common folk believed the droughts to be punishment for runecrafting, so the clan leaders preyed on this belief and incited an attack on all runecrafters on the mainland, hoping to gain the land they so desperately needed.
The 55th year of the reign of Lord Radolin, the 20th day of the month of September, Ardone, Kandarin. Yony arrived in Ardone as part of a delegation of mages from the Wizard's Tower, who had been summoned to the Temple of Light to check on the state of excavation of the Death Altar. In an unsuspecting manner, though, trouble was brewing as on the horizon, a great many warriors could be spotted cresting the ridge to the north, and led by Gunnar. His sights were set on his first target. It was time for destruction. In an excerpt from the book, it reads,
Zamaron held up a hand to stop her. A distant, insistent horn echoed down the tunnels, again and again. "What is that?" he whispered. "A signal?" Yony said. They rushed through the tunnels, the close earth impeding Yony's movement, as if it meant to drag her back. The horns echoed again and again, and her thoughts filled with armies, with the Majorat returned, with longships appearing in the field between the city and the forest. She broke free into the air, to Zamaron scaling the ladder, to the chaotic roar of hundreds and hundreds of voices. Night had fallen, the purple edge of sunset still peeking above the dark and foreboding forest. Only now the silent trees poured forth warriors armed with swords and axes, armoured with horned helmets and shields, with ferocious demonic faces. Fiery arrows struck the palisade, one shot high over the wall, igniting a thatched roof within the city. Here and there above the wave of warriors, great creatures burst into being. Wolves and mammoths and icy behemoths summoned to battle. For a brief, bizarre moment, as she climbed free of the pit, Yony thought of the ghosts haunting the passages below. The tormented soldiers returned to life. For a moment, it made more sense than what she was seeing. The Fremennik didn't attack inland. Everyone knew that. She had time to prepare. She had time to choose the battlefield. But Gunnar had changed the rules. "The gate!" Zamaron shouted and broke into a run. Steel grating clattered down over the open gate, and the guards there called back to halt it, shouted at Zamaron and Yony to run. Yony sprinted after them. An arrow zipped past her, slicing a path across her back that burned with pain and forced a cry from her. Another and another hit the ground before her. She gauged the distance to the approaching Fremennik. This time she had, and saw, a contingent of the fierce warriors racing straight for the excavation pit. For less than a breath, she tried to make sense of it. But all too quickly she thought of maps and legends and stories meant to tempt her friend away from the life he didn't love. The splinter of a memory. Her finger circling what was rapidly becoming Kandarin. Gunnar knew the Death Altar was here, because Yony had told him.
This battle forced the wizards, Kinshra, White Knights, and warriors of Ardone to retreat, giving the Fremennik victory over their enemies. While they were not able to destroy the Death Altar due to the maze-like defenses of the Temple of Light, they did certainly flex and showcase their strength in numbers. Gunnar used his knowledge of Yony's story, everything she told him. He remembered and used this knowledge to locate each altar with plans to desecrate them. Everything the Free Peoples had advanced over the decades, with forming alliances between the dwarves of Camdozal, Misthalin, the Caridian Desert, Kandarin, and more, spreading the practice of runecrafting and still discovering other altars across Gielinor, may soon crumble. Gunnar went to far reaches, from Entrana to the wilderness, destroying altars that were unable to be protected by Asgarnian forces. This, in turn, spread Asgarnia's army very thin, having to aid other cities, protect the altars, and fight against the Fremennik to prevent them from dismantling other settlements. As a countermeasure, as Asgarnia was cut off from the rune essence mine and the altars that were threatened, Yony researched a source of rune magic that did not require individual runes, resulting in a prototype staff that removed the need for air runes. During the final years of the invasion, Gunnar had heard that the rune altars were being repaired, making his crusade seem useless, so he decided to strike the heart of it all, the Wizard's Tower directly, and its stores of rune essence. Gunnar planned a snake's tongue approach, sending out 2 different assault groups, one to Falador and one to the tower. This plan, though, would never end up accordingly, as it was spoiled to the Asgardians by Thyra, Gunnar's daughter, who betrayed her father after not only exiling her for attempting to leave his crusade, but preventing her from leaving with her children. Lord Radolin would agree to send the Kintra to the Wizard's Tower, but kept the White Knights at Falador to defend it. Although the Fremnik assault party did not push heavily into Falador, it was partially successful in its goals, as they were able to infiltrate the ancient city of Camdozal under Ice Mountain, and nearly extinguishing the existence of the Encamdo doors. Flip to the main raid as the assault on the tower began. In a frantic and desperate attempt, Gunnar's last stand would be made. All the pent-up contempt, anger, frustration, and hatred inside him boiled over. In an excerpt from the book, it reads,
Another wave of earth, another fire smothered. Gunnar leapt back out of the way of her spell, reaching for more flasks. How foolish could he be? But he'd already told her. He'd planned to die here. He'd planned to reclaim his honor by any means necessary, each to the extent of his own abilities, for the price of his own sacrifices. Another time, it would have made her sad, but a rage boiled up in Ilme instead. You idiot! She shouted at Gunnar, fumes burning her throat, her eyes, her nose. Someone else started this. If it's about Zoria, then killing both of us isn't going to change anything. Destroying the rune essence, and you will change plenty, Gunnar retorted, pulling out another flask. I don't want to kill you, Ilme shouted. Gunnar, I don't, but if you don't stop, I'll have no choice. There are people in this tower. She broke off, coughing. Something shattered at her feet. A flask. The third flask. The catalyst first this time. The noxious liquid splashed up her hem, staining her green robes black. She met Gunnar's eyes and saw only hurt there. In each hand was their destruction, the components that made the oily flames. She didn't want to kill Gunnar. Panic swallowed Ilme. She grabbed at her runes, all instinct, the stones bulging between her fingers. Gunnar threw the flasks, and she crushed together the errant stones, slipping from her grasp. Her mouth tasted metallic, sparks biting her tongue as the air staff's magic swept through her. A wave of water flowed out from her, a torrent like a waterfall crashing sideways. White foam coiled at the spell's terminus, where it crashed into the flasks, shattering the glass. The fluids mixed, the flames erupted. And as before, the water carried a fire so hot it could crack stones along, like ships sailing over the waves, before crashing over the great Jarl, Gunnar Viljarson, and engulfing him in flames.
Gunnar's body was transported back to the Fremnik for a proper burial, and although the war did not end then and there, it did slowly die down until it eventually fizzled out. The village of Gunnarsgrund was founded shortly after, where those who agreed to settle down somewhere with Gunnar now reside, along with his descendants. Our story is not done yet though, as Ilme would continue her study of magic and runecrafting long after Gunnar passed away. In the year 70 of the 5th Age, Ilme, along with her 3 apprentices, had also made a prototype Earth Tiara, Law Staff, and Nature Staff. It was later revealed that Valzin had been the one to summon the demon in the Rune Essence mine all those years ago, leading to the breakdown of everything that had happened up to that point, and Ilme confronted her about it. She responded that Asgarnia became stronger because of the war, and warned Ilme about trying to go against her. Ilme disregarded her threats and went straight to Lord Radolin, who wildly chose not to pursue the matter further, in fact, stating that Vol'zin would be adopted by him and named his heir. Post-announcement, many concerns rose from within the kingdom, especially from the Saradominus. Vol'zin and Radalin agreed that she would step down in favor of a different heir, and Lord Radalin would select Ilmi, per Vol'zin's suggestion, although something nefarious was going on behind the selection. As tensions died down, Vol'zin had sneaked away. Following the burning of the Wizard's Tower, Vol'zin returned to Falador with a sprained arm, and Ilmi suspected that she had been the one to plant rumors of a Sardamis insurrection, and that she was looking for Archmage Perion's enchanted weapon set, with which to assassinate Lord Radalin, and pin the blame on the Saradominus. As Ilmi had no proof to present to Radalin, she waited in his chambers every night until Vol'zin finally made her attempt. In an excerpt from the book, it reads,
When the clatter of his armor had passed out of earshot, Vol'zin relaxed. She took off the harness that held the sword Radalin had gifted her, and opened a slim pocket stitched into the scabbard where it lay against her back. She drew out a blue and silver dagger that shivered with magic and opened the door. It was darker still in the king's bedchambers, but the slow rhythm of Radalin's breath filled the room. Vol'zin moved carefully toward it, drawing a small number of runestones from her own pocket. She paused beside Radalin's bed, the moonlight enough to trace the long bulk of the king at rest there. "The things I have done for you," she whispered. She brought the runes close and unlocked the magic in them. Greenish light pouring from her fingers to draw vines out of nothing to wrap Radalin tight. He woke, startled. He cried, "Sana?" "Radalin," she said flatly, and raised the dagger. In the same moment, another pulse of magic flooded the room. Stronger vines erupted from the floor, seizing Vol'zin and folding her arm, bent back to strike so that her hand was trapped against her armoured shoulder. Ilme lit the lantern beside her, illuminating the shadowed corner where she'd been waiting, night after night, for Vol'zin to strike. "What took you so long?" Ilme said as she climbed onto the bed to free the king. "I assume this is evidence enough, Your Majesty?" Nothing about Vol'zin was smiling now. Here was the cold, hard anger that had flashed free that day after the White Knights had been rewarded. "Interesting," she said. Radalin broke free of the vines and stood, the bed between him and Vol'zin. "Sana, what beyond the edicts? How could you? How could you?" Vol'zin said nothing for a moment, as if she were calculating any and all paths out of this, and finding them wanting, said, "Does it matter?" she said at last. "You were done with him," Ilme said. "You saw your influence fading. For all he loves you, he listens too much to the Saradominans." "That's a lie," Radalin snapped. "Oh, it is not," Vol'zin spat. "I built you, I guided you, I made this kingdom through you. And for what? You're turning it into Misthalin to rot in its own self-satisfaction, and you won't hear a word about it."
After a potential crisis was averted, Lord Radalin would exile Vol'zin for her crimes, with the Kinshra to follow. From here on out, runecrafting would continue to soar to new heights of popularity and become an integral part of everyday life within Gielinor. But before ending the video, we have two more entries to look at that have played significant roles to the establishment and longevity of runecrafting. Towards the later years of Radalin's reign and the events of Gunnar, Ilmi, and Vol'zin, the Wizard's Tower had burnt down and, following this cataclysm, was rebuilt under the guidance of wizards who aligned with Saradomin. They blamed everything on the Zamorakian mages and forced them to live as outlaws of the tower. In this time, an order known as ZMI, or the Zamorak Magical Institute, was arming Zamorakian magical specialists with runes in order to discover the incantation for the teleportation spell to the Rune Essence mine from the Wizard's Tower. They were in essence successful, as they managed a major breakthrough whilst conducting Operation Transient. This is their findings. In the Abyssal book given to you upon completing the mini-quest Enter the Abyss, Conclusion 3 reads,
Our first discovery of abyssal space was somewhat of a fluke, and not an easily repeatable fluke at that. It proved exceedingly difficult to find the correct mystical resonance for this dimension, due to my original belief that the abyssal space is not a fully fledged dimension of its own, so we have to resort to unusual measures to gain permanent access to this realm. We took a large number of initiates and gave them each supplies to cast a portal spell. We then had them repeatedly teleport to various locations, seeking to replicate the original error that caused the first entry into abyssal space. Once one of our initiates had managed to fail his teleport and appear in abyssal space, he was then charged with remaining there and holding a portal spell open so that the more senior members of the ZMI could gain entry via his portal. This initiate is still there, and due to the intense concentration required to keep the portal open, it is recommended that we leave him there holding the bridge open for us. As an initiate, he's always more expendable should something go wrong, and the slow passage of time within abyssal space means we don't even need to worry about feeding him or anything. At the time of this writing, this portal is still active, and will allow us to teleport people at will into abyssal space. The only downside of this method of teleportation is that we are using magic provided us by Lord Zamorak himself, so anybody who uses this teleport will inevitably be marked by him, or become scolded, as the common folk put it. An interesting side effect of this portal is that various teleports within abyssal space were opened up by its casting. These teleports seem to lead to mysterious temples dedicated to various magical elements, which I believe are directly related to the rumors we have intercepted of the rediscovery of runecrafting by the Wizard's Tower. Sadly, we must conclude from these temples that the rumors are indeed true, and that the destruction of the Wizard's Tower had been in vain, as was the sacrifice of those who died to try and prevent the meddling Saradominus from getting access to the further creation of magical runes. I have detailed my findings to Runecrafting in a separate document and passed it on to my superiors, along with my recommendations on how best to thwart the research further. Until a final decision is taken, I suggest we make the best of a bad situation and increase our own rune production to full manufacturing capabilities. I have already ordered buyers to purchase as much sample XJ13 as can be bought, and to hire some mercenaries to sabotage the research efforts of the Wizard's Tower. Or failing that, to provide us with some insight into where their steady supplies of these essences are coming from. Until my next report, I remain as ever a loyal servant. Strength through chaos.
Lastly, in the year 169 of the 5th Age, Wizard Elris founded the Runecrafting Guild in the shadow of the original Wizard's Tower, a pocketed area of space that functions in much the same way as the Runecrafting Altar themselves. It is here that we find the dimension known as the Runespan, where runic energies are much purer than on Gielinor. Although debated in the Runecrafting Guild, Wizard Phoenix claims that the runecrafting altars currently used to craft runes will become unstable, and you can hear this in his commentary.
I'm a student at the Wizard's Tower. I'm here to see Wizard Elris in the Runecrafting Guild about the thesis I wrote on runecrafting. Well, it explains my theory that the runecrafting altars are not everlasting. They are vast stores for runic energy, but one day they will run out. I believe that's why Wizard Elris wants to see me. The Runecrafting Guild wizards cannot disprove my theories, and I think it's worrying them.
Will this prove to hold true? Who knows? We shall see what the future holds. And this brings us to the conclusion of the video. Once again, if you enjoyed, go ahead and give the video a like and subscribe for more, and leave us a comment on your thoughts on the video. I'd like to give a shout out to my readers, Knexus, Potatohime, Vendavar, Glacial Phoenix, Rheyo, and Farmer Foy. I really do appreciate it. Their socials are down in the description. Also, go ahead and check out the Gift of Guthix novel. It's a great and really fun read. Runescape. Forever.